help with the release of endorphins. Then this brings us to the most common Tier 2 condition that's neurological, and that's ADHD, and it's now called, it used to be called ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The new DSM-5 calls it ADD with or without hyperactivity. So no one knows exactly what causes ADHD, but certain things are known to play a role, and we have a lot of information on what a brain looks like that the person has symptoms of ADHD. So the frontal cortex that regulates these executive functions of attention, impulse control, and planning don't function the same as a neurotypical child. If a parent has ADHD, a child has more than 50% chance of having it. If the child has an older sibling with it, the child has more than a 30% chance of having ADD. Children born with a low birth rate, who are premature, their mothers have difficult pregnancies, are at a higher risk of having ADHD. So that's when you're in your RTI meetings, when you're doing your early referrals on students that you are considering for special education. One of the questions you want to ask the parent is, was their pregnancy typical? Did they have challenges? Because that can lend to a higher risk of complicating conditions for your student. The same is true for children with head injuries to the frontal lobe of the brain, the area that controls impulses and emotion. If they've had some type of blow to the front of the head, they may now display ADHD symptoms. Studies show that pregnant women who smoke, drink alcohol, have a higher risk of having a child with ADHD, and we know for sure exposure to lead, PCBs, or pesticides also play a role. Researchers believe that some toxins may interfere with brain development. That, they say, could lead to hyperactivity, impulsive behavior, and trouble paying attention. So that's, we've seen more of that as we've seen chemicals leaching into our water, fluorocarbons, etc., etc. Now, what doesn't cause ADHD? The research is clear on this. It's highly debated, but ADHD is not linked to eating too much sugar or watching a lot of TV. That does not produce ADHD. You can get ADHD, ADD with hyperactivity, or ADD without hyperactivity components if a child isn't sleeping enough. So maybe if they're staying up watching a lot of TV past their bedtime. We know that children who don't get enough sleep, that it impacts the development of that sheath and of course impacts the development of those executive functioning skills. Another thing we do know is that recently the FDA panel almost banned certain food dyes in children's foods because we know that the food dye can cause symptoms of hyperactivity in children. So maybe not the sugar, but I guess it could be the food dyes. What goes on in the brain? Studies show that brain chemicals called neurotransmitters don't work the same in children and adults with the ADD. They also tend to be differences in the way the nerve pathways work. Certain parts of the brain may be less active or smaller in children with ADD than those without the disorder. That's why stimulants work, because that part of the brain is less active. The stimulants speed up that process. So that's why you see that students who take that stimulant can sometimes have better control over that executive functioning part of their brain. The brain chemical dopamine may also play a role. It carries signals between the nerves and the brain, and it's linked to movement, sleep, mood, attention, and learning. So again, just a lot of things going on that can conspire to create that tough child. The good news is that one of the things we know is neuroplasticity is a plus, because the brain can be changed both structurally and chemically by experience or through pharmaceuticals. Study in rats show that an enriched environment leads to larger neurons with more connections. So building dendrites in the classroom is one way that these students can kind of get past these biological challenges. It's also been shown in humans that enriched environments lead to larger neurons with more connections. Recent research has uncovered evidence of neurogenesis, or the production of new brain cells in humans, when humans are presented with an enriched environment where they're actively engaged in learning. More about the brain. The central core of the brain. The thalamus relays information from sensory receptors to the brain. The hypothalamus influences motivated behavior. So that's the kid who's motivated to succeed, the kid that will delay gratification. It regulates hunger, thirst, body temperature, sexual drive. People call this the animal part of the brain. I guess that might be true because it's far more prominent in lower primates. It's directly involved in emotional behavior. The central core, reticular formation, is this network of neurons found throughout the brain, and it serves to alert and arouse the higher brain in response to incoming information. Then we have the limbic system, rings of structures located between the central core and the cerebral hemispheres. It's important to learning and emotional behavior. The hippocampus is essential in the formation of new memories, and the amygdala, together with the hippocampus, is important for regulating emotions. One of the things we know is that in this little tiny walnut-shaped amygdala in people that suffer depression is slightly decreased in size. In some people with autism, shows signs of atrophy or shrinkage. So we know that that is important in regulating our emotions and how we can respond to other humans. The cerebral cortex, the occipital lobe receives and processes visual information and then stores it. It stores it throughout in the frontal lobe, primary motor cortex, the somatosensory cortex, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. That's what we're trying to do as teachers, is we're trying to move things from frontal lobe short-term memory into other parts of the brain as long-term memories. The parietal lobe receives sensory information from the body involved in spatial abilities, so the mathematics, the more complex problem solving. The frontal lobe coordinates the information from all the other lobes. So that's why if your students can't attend or express appropriate emotions, that they're really struggling with the information, because trying to coordinate and pull all that long-term information and deal with short-term working memory becomes challenging. Hemispheric specialization. Your corpus callosum are the fibers that connect the two hemispheres of the brain. You hear oftentimes people are left-brained or right-brained, and in truth, we do have one side that's more dominant or more active, and areas of the brain that control different features, such as the left hemisphere controls writing and movement of the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls touch and movement of the left side of the body. But one thing we know, because we have some children who, because of epilepsy and seizures, have had half their brain removed, the other half of your brain can pick up and learn the functions of the other side. So that plasticity is universal. We're also learning that the areas of the brain are not as specialized as we once thought, because when people have suffered damage in specific areas, other parts of the brain still contain memories and are able to perform the functions of that part of the brain that's been damaged. Each hemisphere appears to be specialized in certain functions. However, other parts of the brains can also manage those functions. The spinal cord carries those impulses again from the brain. Those complex cable of nerves that connects our brain to the rest of the body carries those motor impulses from the brain to the internal organs. And students with ADHD and some other neuro challenging behaviors, those impulses are not regulated. So we often say it's instead of think act, it's act think in that brain. That seems like fires, carries the impulse, and then the thought processes occur after. But it carries sensory information from the extremity to the central organs to the brain. The spinal cord controls some of the protective reflexive movements without any input from the brain at all. So we don't have to, if you touch something hot, your brain is going to tell it, get back. If you can picture that for our trauma students, their brain is signaling danger even when danger isn't necessarily imminent. The peripheral nervous system, of course, controls your somatic nervous system and your autonomic nervous system, your breathing, your parasympathetic and sympathetic division. The somatic nervous system consists of neurons that communicate between the body and the brain, neurons that carry messages from sense organs to the spinal cord, and neurons that carry messages from the spinal cord or brain to the muscles and glands. So this autonomic nervous system is most active when you're afraid or angry or aroused. So for our students in trauma, you can see that their nervous system they're thirsty. They've got to go to the bathroom. They need to get up. They can't stay in their chair. Or you have the opposite. They withdraw. They freeze. They don't move. But their heart rate is increased and their breathing is increased. They need to tap into the parasympathetic, the part that's calming the body, that's producing the effects opposite to those of the sympathetic. We need to reduce their heart rate and breathing. We need to provide that safe environment and some help in restoring that adrenal response back to normal. In this PowerPoint that I'll post for you, this kind of goes through and just shows the connection, the organization of the nervous system in brain and behavior, in neural responses and key parts of the neurons. The second page helps you take a look at heredity and behavior, the endocrine system, right brain, left brain. What sorts of things can damage the nervous system for our students? Trauma, infections, degeneration of cells or the sheath, structural defects, tumors, blood flow disruption, autoimmune disorders, inborn genetic or metabolic problems, toxic exposures, or direct effects of drug use. ADD with hyperactivity or without hyperactivity, apnea, asphyxia, autism spectrum disorder, Bell's palsy, brachial plexus palsy, brain tumor, cerebral palsy, vasculitis, dystonia, epilepsy, fetal alcohol syndrome, Friedreich's ataxia, hydrocephalus, and treatment with people that have in the types of encephalitis, intravascular hemorrhage, meningitis, movement disorders, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, myoclonus, neural tube defects, paraventricular disease, Chiari malformation, spinal bifida, stroke, Sydenham's, chorea, tethered cord, tremor, white matter damage. So, what's my point? Not all maladaptive behavior is just willful. There are billions of biological functions that conspire, so to speak, to cause our tough kids. So in those cases, you can manage the behavior, but you're not going to cure it. You're not going to call them into your office and offer them the right punishment, exhort them to change their ways and fix them. You can, however, learn to effectively manage them, and that's what we're going to do. And we can effectively manage them without causing us or our staff undue stress and pressure. And we can do it in a way that makes a difference in the lives of people, and that's really why we're all here. These are my works cited, and I was fortunate in working for Boise for 10 years. I met once a month for an afternoon with our district consulting psychiatrist, and I learned so much information about children and what we can do to help our students be successful. So I hope you'll be patient with me as I journey to share with you the things I know that make a difference in managing classroom behaviors in the mainstream setting. Thank you.